What if Jon Snow didn't kill Daenerys? It's been nearly 5 years since the final episode of Game of Thrones, and honestly, I'm still a little traumatized by what I witnessed. Did Daenerys really have to lose her mind and burn King's Landing to ashes? And most importantly, did Jon Snow really have to stab and kill her? The answer is yes, he had to kill her, but that hasn't stopped me from wondering, what would have happened if he hadn't? Which is exactly what we'll be exploring in today's video. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we dive in, here's a quick stat. Only 25% of our viewers are actually subscribed. So if you're a part of the 75 who haven't yet, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Now with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Chapter 1, The Dagger's Edge. We do it together. We break the wheel together, Daenerys said softly as she fell into Jon's embrace. You are my queen. Now and always, he replied in a stoic tone. The two shared a kiss that only those who have known true love could fully understand. But it wouldn't last long. As the kiss lingered, Jon's left hand moved toward the dagger at his hip. What she had done to King's Landing was unforgivable. He couldn't shake the thought. It was only a matter of time before she turned her fury on the other kingdoms of Westeros, and eventually Winterfell. But she saved Winterfell, he reminded himself. Surely she wouldn't burn it to the ground. Yet he knew otherwise. She would demand Sansa's loyalty, force her to bend the knee, and Sansa, she would never do it. Jon realized there was only one choice left. He had to kill Daenerys, but he couldn't. The truth of his lineage had strained his love for her, but it hadn't extinguished it. She was his queen, now and always. What are you doing? Grey Worm's voice echoed through the Red Keep. He stood at the entrance, spear in hand, his face a mask of fury. Daenerys quickly pulled away from Jon, turning toward Grey Worm. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her eyes narrowing. My queen, Grey Worm said, his voice tight. He had his hand on his dagger. He was going to kill you. Daenerys' gaze snapped back to Jon. Is this true? She asked, her voice sharp and accusing. Aye, Jon admitted. It's true, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Why? Daenerys hissed through gritted teeth, tilting her head back to glare down at him. What you did today, the people, the children. I can't let you do that to the people of Westeros. Not now, not ever, Jon said, his voice heavy with emotion. The people of King's Landing had a choice, Daenerys replied coldly. As will the people of the Vale, the Iron Islands, and of course, Winterfell. Make the wrong choice and they will die screaming. Make the right choice and they will live freely, as the people of Meereen do. And what is the right choice, my queen? Jon asked, his heart sinking. To bend the knee and swear fealty, Daenerys said without hesitation. Jon's worst fear was now a reality. Sansa won't do it, my queen. What then? She will follow you, Daenerys said, tone unwavering. I won't bend the knee either, Jon admitted, his voice resolute. Daenerys fixed him with a piercing gaze. From behind her, Drogon emerged, landing beside the throne with a low growl. The massive dragon's head slithered down to Daenerys' side, nostrils flaring as steam escaped in sharp bursts. Be done with it then. Say the word, Jon said, standing firm. Daenerys hesitated for only a moment. Then she motioned to Grey Worm. Take him away. Without hesitation, Grey Worm advanced toward Jon. But as he closed the distance, Jon drew Longclaw, positioning himself for a fight. It doesn't have to be this way, Jon pleaded. You are still my queen. We can find a compromise. If you aren't with me, then you're against me, Daenerys replied, her voice trembling as a tear rolled down her cheek. Jon turned back to Grey Worm, who was locked onto him, spear raised. Don't do this, Jon warned. You know you won't win. Don't be so sure, Grey Worm retorted. In an instant, Grey Worm lunged, thrusting his spear toward Jon. Jon spun to the side, bringing Longclaw down in an attempt to cut the spear in half. But Grey Worm was too quick, pulling back and spinning before thrusting again, this time at Jon's head. Jon was quicker still. Daenerys watched the battle unfold, the clash of steel and wood echoing in the Red Keep. She could end this now. All she had to do was say the word, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. Ugh! A gurgling scream broke her trance. She looked up, realizing it was Grey Worm. Somehow, Jon had thrust his dagger into Grey Worm's gut, a dire wound, though not fatal if treated in time. Panting, covered in ash and blood, Jon forced Grey Worm to his knees, holding a dagger to his throat. The tension in the room was suffocating. Daenerys stared at Jon, her mind racing. He wouldn't do it. He couldn't. Could he? Jon shoved Grey Worm toward Daenerys, breaking the standoff. Without a word, he turned and bolted toward the Red Keep's entrance. Daenerys was faced with a choice: pursue Jon, alert the guards, and exact vengeance, or save Grey Worm by finding a Maester. She couldn't do both. Though rage burned within her, she chose her friend. Climbing onto Drogon, she lifted Grey Worm's limp form into the dragon's claws. As they ascended into the sky, she swore that she wouldn't let Jon Snow get away with this. Chapter 2: The Dragon's Den. Clang, thump, gurgle. Tyrion wasn't sleeping, but the sudden noises startled him all the same. Had they come to execute him? No, that didn't explain the sounds he was hearing. The only possible explanation was that someone had come to save him, or perhaps a new executioner had arrived. Either way, he liked his chances. He swallowed hard as the sound of keys jingled against the lock. The door flew open, revealing a disheveled and panting Jon Snow. "What have you done?" Tyrion asked in a somber tone. "There's no time to explain," Jon answered hurriedly. "Do you know a way out of here? A way that won't get us sliced to pieces, you mean?" "Aye," Jon said, his expression grim. Tyrion thought for a moment. The easiest way out would have been through the cellars, but those had collapsed. There was, however, another option. "Follow me," Tyrion barked, motioning for Jon to come along. After what felt like an eternity navigating the labyrinthine halls of the Red Keep, the two emerged in the northern courtyard. They walked through an archway that led to a vantage point overlooking Blackwater Bay. To the right, buried beneath debris and overgrown bushes, was a hidden path leading down to the beach. Tyrion remembered it from his youth, when he and Jaime would sneak out at night to avoid their father's ever-watchful guards. Both men descended the narrow path, their feet slipping on loose dirt and ash until they finally reached the beach. But there, waiting for them, was a small group of Dothraki screamers, 3 boys, each mounted on a horse. "Does the rest of the army know what's happened yet?" Tyrion whispered to Jon. "I'm not sure," Jon admitted. "Why?" "Because if they don't, you outrank them. Just walk up and demand their horses. If they don't know, we'll be fine. If they do," Tyrion shrugged. "Well, I'm decent with a shield." They brushed the ash from their clothes and strode casually toward the Dothraki boys. The screamers couldn't have been older than 16. "I need your horses," Jon commanded firmly. The boys didn't respond. They couldn't understand him. One, however, couldn't stop staring at Tyrion, his gaze making the imp uneasy. "Did you not hear me? I need your horses," Jon repeated, more forcefully this time. One of the screamers spoke, but not to Jon. Instead, he muttered something to the others. Tyrion caught just enough to recognize a word: Javat. It didn't mean to pull, he thought. No, that was just soft. Javat meant to imprison. "They know!" Tyrion yelled. In an instant, Jon drew Longclaw and severed the head of the screamer closest to him. The second boy screamed as he charged at Jon, weapon raised. But he was young and inexperienced. Jon cut him down with ease, like a farmer slaughtering a lamb. The third boy stood frozen, gripping his weapon tightly. Jon looked at him and shook his head. There was no point. A Dothraki screamer wouldn't run from battle. It would dishonor him. Mercifully, Jon spared him. With a quick sideways swing of his sword, he sliced open the side of the boy's face, but didn't deal a killing blow. Jon and Tyrion quickly mounted 2 of the horses and galloped away, leaving the wounded screamers behind. As they rode, the distant sound of bells echoed through the air. The hunt had begun. Chapter 3: Favorable Winds. Under normal circumstances, Jon liked his chances. The men of King's Landing, while decent on a horse, weren't as skilled as the men of the north. But it wasn't King's Landing soldiers hunting him. It was the Dothraki, the undisputed masters of horseback warfare. If they were caught, neither Tyrion nor Jon would stand a chance. The days following their escape from King's Landing were grueling. They constantly pushed their horses to their limits, only stopping briefly to find places to hide. But with the Dothraki hot on their trail, rest was a luxury they could not afford. The journey from King's Landing to Winterfell typically took 48 days, 36 if you pushed your horses hard enough. At their current pace, though, it would take a minimum of 2 months. Fortunately, Jon had left a small retinue of men at Dragonstone to continue mining, and with them, he had left a ship. If the winds were kind, they would reach Winterfell within a month. When Jon and Tyrion arrived at Dragonstone, Jon immediately gathered the men and ordered them to prepare the ship for departure. The crew were expert sailors, seasoned and reliable, and even if they weren't, they didn't have much of a choice. Luckily, the winds were on their side. Jon silently thanked Arya for that one. Had winter come with the Night King, the winds would have pushed south. But now, with the climate shifting, the winds carried them steadily north. After 3 weeks of hard sailing, Jon, Tyrion, and their scrappy band of sailors arrived at White Harbor, one of the North's 5 major cities, Winterfell included. There weren't enough horses to accommodate everyone, so Jon ordered the men to march north on foot while he and Tyrion pushed their horses to their limits for the final stretch of the journey. He prayed Daenerys hadn't flown north yet. Her armies couldn't possibly be there, but with Drogon she could reach Winterfell in days. After 5 grueling days of hard riding, Jon and Tyrion arrived at Winterfell. The city was still reeling from the Battle of the Long Night. Battle encampments sprawled across the grounds, and the scorched earth served as a grim reminder of the fight they had barely survived. As they rode through the gates, murmurs spread like wildfire. Men and women stopped in their tracks, gasping at the sight of them. Brienne of Tarth was the first to approach. Her expression was a mix of curiosity and relief as she stepped forward. "We didn't expect you for many more months, my lord. Is everything all right?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Fetch Sansa and Arya," Jon replied, his voice grave. "Tell them to meet me in the hall. The war isn't over. It's just begun." Chapter 4: Ashes of Winterfell. "I told you she couldn't be trusted. She's no different from her father, the Mad King," Sansa said, her voice dripping with condemnation. Jon sat at the head of the long table in Winterfell's hall, his face heavy with concern. As Lord of Winterfell, he bore the weight of every decision, with the lords of the north gathered before him. Sansa sat to his left, her presence commanding as always. To his right was an empty seat. Apparently, Arya had ridden south toward King's Landing shortly after Jon's desperate escape. He was confident in her abilities, but given recent events, he couldn't help but worry. "I know," Jon replied, "but we don't have time to point fingers. The fact is, Daenerys will soon march north, with an army of rested Unsullied, Dothraki, and a dragon." "Now," came a voice from the corner of the room. Jon turned sharply. It was Bran. "What did you say?" a burly northern lord growled. "Now," Bran repeated calmly. "She's already begun her march north. It's not soon, it's now." "How do you know this, boy?" the lord demanded. "I've seen it," Bran replied, his tone steady as his gaze. "Just as I saw where you hid during the long night." The hall erupted into scattered laughter at the jab, but Bran's face remained impassive, unbothered by the mockery. "Enough," Jon said, his voice cutting through the noise. "If what Bran says is true, then it's only a matter of time before she arrives. Fortunately, her army has just marched all the way south. The Dothraki and Unsullied hate the north. They'll arrive tired, weak, and angry. We can use that to our advantage." "We can't defeat a dragon," Sansa said sharply, her tone laced with doubt. Jon leaned back, glancing toward Tyrion, who had been unusually quiet during this entire exchange. "I don't think we have to," Jon said. Tyrion finally looked up, his expression contemplative. "The Night King killed a dragon," Jon continued. "Euron Greyjoy killed a dragon. We can too." Chapter 5: Ladder of Chaos. As Jon stood on the ramparts, gazing at the army of Dothraki and Unsullied assembled before him, he felt an odd moment of peace. He had died before, and without the power of the Red Woman, he knew there would be no coming back this time. The last 2 months had been brutal. He and Sansa had done everything they could to prepare for what they feared would be a long siege, rationing provisions, fortifying defenses, and bracing people for the worst. Meanwhile, Tyrion worked tirelessly to devise a plan to take down a dragon. Funny, Jon thought, how the future of Westeros hung on the mind of a half-man. As clever as Tyrion was, Jon couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. In a desperate attempt at diplomacy, Jon had sent Tyrion to parley with Daenerys. He had volunteered to go himself, but both Tyrion and Sansa convinced him otherwise. It was a mistake. 3 days had passed, and Tyrion hadn't returned. Jon didn't know if he had been killed, or worse, if he had switched sides. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered now was what Daenerys would do next. As though she could read his thoughts, Daenerys took to the sky on Drogon for the first time since she arrived at their gates. Her massive shadow swept over Winterfell as Drogon roared, a sound that chilled even the most battle-hardened among them. It was time. The men of Winterfell had done their best to recreate the harpoon weapons once used in King's Landing to kill the dragons. But it was futile. Daenerys had fought against them before. She knew their weaknesses and how to evade them. What was worse, Drogon now wore a harness, and Daenerys was equipped with lightweight leather armor and a small shield strapped to her left arm. Not even a stray arrow could hope to take her down. The attack lasted less than an hour. In that short time, Drogon's fire blasted through the gates, reducing their defenses to ash. The army of Dothraki and Unsullied surged into the courtyard, overwhelming what little resistance Winterfell had left. Jon and Sansa were dragged into the courtyard, surrounded by Daenerys' forces. Daenerys dismounted, her presence commanding as she strode toward them. Her gaze was cold, her voice unwavering. Grey Worm stood next to her, bandages across his stomach where Jon had stabbed him. "Your choice is simple," she said. "Bend the knee, and I will allow you and your people to live freely in the north, as part of my kingdom. Or refuse, and face the same fate as the Tarlys. The choice is yours." Her words hung in the air like the threat of a storm, and Jon's heart sank as he realized there was no easy way out. One by one, the men and women of the north began to kneel. Yet Sansa, Jon, and a handful of northern lords remained standing, their resolve unshaken. "The north has suffered the wrath of too many southern kings and queens to ever bow again," Sansa spat, her voice seething with defiance. "I would rather die than kneel to someone with no right to the throne." Jon flinched. Foolish girl. Why had she done that? Daenerys' greatest vulnerability was her tenuous claim to the throne, a claim now tarnished by the truth of Jon's lineage. Sansa's words were like a dagger, and Jon knew Daenerys wouldn't let them go unanswered. "Bring her to me," Daenerys commanded, motioning to her guards. In moments, the Unsullied seized Sansa, forcing her to her knees before Daenerys. "Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell," Daenerys began, her voice cold and regal. "I, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, first of my name, breaker of chains and mother of dragons, sentence you to die. Dracarys." "No!" Jon roared, struggling against the Unsullied restraining him, but it was of no use. In an instant, Drogon unleashed his fire. Sansa was gone, wiped from existence, leaving behind nothing but ash swirling in the cold northern wind. What little love Jon had left for Daenerys died in that moment. She wasn't a queen. She was a monster, no different from her father, the Mad King. One by one, Daenerys executed every northern lord who refused to swear fealty. And with each death, a new, more fearful man or woman would rise to take their place, bowing low before their conqueror. "Chaos is a ladder," Jon muttered under his breath, recalling a lesson once whispered by a scheming voice long silenced. The executions dragged on, flames burning late into the night. Finally, it was Jon's turn. Daenerys stood before him, her expression both triumphant and expectant. "So what will it be, Jon Snow? Will you bend the knee, or will you suffer the same fate as your sister?" She leaned closer, voice dripping with mockery. "You once said I was your queen, for now and always. Were you lying? I thought you were a man of your word." Jon said nothing. His heart felt like stone. He couldn't comprehend how the woman he had once loved became this. She was darkness incarnate, her fury more terrifying than the long night itself. Daenerys' voice cut through his thoughts, as cold and final as a death sentence. "I, Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen, first of my name, mother of dragons." Jon's heart pounded. "Sentence you to die." Ba-dum. His heart thumped louder. Dracarys. To be continued. And that's where we're gonna stop the script today. How cruel, right? Well, if you want to hear more of this story past a brutal cliffhanger, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the Amagi. Ring that bell for good measure so you don't miss it when it comes out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.